What's up, people? How you doing again? Last time we were talking about, we were discussing the house of Israel. Jacob had passed away and was buried outside of Egypt per his request. Joseph, when he passed away, was also buried outside of Egypt upon his request. Most of the Egyptians, the true Egyptians, wanted to be buried on Egyptian soil, and that was the ancient Egyptians. I want to say they all wanted to be buried on Egyptian soil, especially the Pharaoh and his court. So Jacob, Joseph, the rest of the kids, they all moved to Egypt. But according to Jacob, he got a message from God saying they was going to come out of that. He was going to deliver his people out of Egypt. But I noticed as the professor was talking, he didn't say when they were going to be delivered out of Egypt. Jacob didn't live to see it. Joseph didn't live to see it. Moses did. And usually when you get messages like that from God, that's exactly what it is. There's no timetable because you're not working on your timetable of what you think should happen and when you think should happen. God just lets you know, hey, this is what's getting ready to go down. But God works on his own time. He's the author of time. So some people get upset about certain things that's prophesied in the Bible, and it's like, oh, well, the Bible said it was going to happen at this date, and it didn't pass, and, well, can you really put a time stamp on things like that? Prophetic time stamp? Even Jesus said nobody knows when the end is coming. You'll know when you'll have signs that the end is coming, but you won't actually know when the end is going to come. Like they talk about the end of days. My personal feeling, yeah, we are living in the end time, but it could drag on for months, years. Who knows how long? Whenever God get good, God darn ready. So with that being said, let's get into this week's discussion.
It's an interesting one for a lot of reasons. First, we got a lot of numbers. 11 is interesting. 7, you got 7, 11. 3 features also. Remember, you have the 3 cakes on the head. A lot of 3s, a lot of numbers. But we don't have any archaeological evidence for it. Were there ever a large number of Israelites in Egypt? What can we make of the story, right? And what I want to do today is kind of look at the story in an Egyptological view. Does it ring true? You see, there are 2 ways you can try to verify a story. One is you can look at external evidence. Do we have statues of Joseph? Do we have statues of Jacob? We don't have the name of anybody named Joseph in Egypt. There's no record that talks about a Joseph in Egypt. We don't. That's external evidence. But the other is internal evidence. Does the story hang together? Does it make a consistent, coherent tale? It's interesting. Let's look at it. First, let's talk about the story of Potiphar, right, where Joseph is unjustly accused of advances on Potiphar's wife. There happens to be an ancient Egyptian short story called The Tale of Two Brothers, which has just this feature. The good brother is working in the fields. The wife of the bad wife of one makes advances. He refuses it. She accuses him. So there's an Egyptian kind of tradition for this sort of story, right? That's not that impressive. What about Potiphar's name? It's an Egyptian name. It's a little bit garbled in the telling, but Padi, it's probably Padire, means Pa is that, D means given by Ra, the sun god. So Padire means given by the sun god. So Potiphar, at least, is a good name. It makes sense in Egyptian terms. Now, there's another, you see, we're doing a little bit of the other approach towards Egyptian history that I mentioned, the philological approach, looking at language. Now, there's a wonderful, wonderful bit of evidence in Pharaoh's magicians. Now, remember, the magicians are called to interpret the dreams, but they can't. They don't know what the 7 lean, ears of corn are, what the fat cows are doing. They don't understand it. But in the Bible, it says Pharaoh called for his magicians. Now, remember back to the lesson on language, that the latest form of Egyptian language, the latest form of the writing, is Coptic. Coptic was ancient Egyptian written in Greek, and the Copts, the Christians in Egypt, have their Bible, the Christian Bible, right? But they have the Old Testament, and they tell the story. They write the story. They have an Old Testament too, and they tell the story of Joseph. What is the word in Coptic for magician? That's going to be the coup. The word for Coptic, the word in Coptic for magician in the Coptic Bible is seshperach. Seshperach. Now, remember, Coptic is ancient Egyptian. So does seshperach mean anything? The answer is yes. Seshperach is really 3 words. Sesh means scribe. Per is house. Ach is life. The magicians are the scribes of the house of life. Now, the house of life in Egypt was basically a theological college. It was a school associated with the temple, the house of life, where priests were trained. So this rings true. Who is the Pharaoh going to call to interpret a dream? The priests of the house of life. So it's kind of neat that you got this, through Coptic, a little bit of internal verification. It's starting to make sense in Egyptian terms. Now, let me get a little further into this thing about priests interpreting dreams. In the Joseph story, Joseph's real skill isn't having dreams. It's not like today. We think that people who have prophetic dreams are special, the Gene Dixon types or whatever. That wasn't it in Egypt. The Egyptians believed that everybody had prophetic dreams. Let me go further. They believed that every dream was prophetic. The real skill was in interpreting, and that was Joseph's skill.
Now, I'm leaning towards believing what he's saying about dreams, because in the black community, big mamas and aunties, they always had dreams. But like he said, the skill was interpreting the dreams. For instance, if somebody has a dream, if your mom or your grandma have a dream about fish, most black people already know what that means. If you have a dream of a deceased loved one coming to visit you, you need to get your life together. There's something you need to do before you die. Or depending on the details of the dream, it could be telling you that person's being dead already is a message saying that another person that you know is about to die, or someone close to somebody that you know is about to die. It could be a coworker. You could have a dream you could have a dream of a deceased relative visiting you, passing on information. 2 days later, you go to work and one of your close co-workers not there. Or they come to work, but they feeling down. He was like, "Hey, what's going on? Why you look so sad?" "Oh, well, my grandmother passed away yesterday morning." Okay, coincidence. But throughout your life, if it keeps happening, the same coincidence, you having these weird dreams, and then something similar in reality coincides with the dream, then it's not a coincidence anymore. You're having a dream, but you're not being able to put the pieces together as far as interpreting the dream. And that's what Joseph was good at. He was good at interpreting the dream. And like I said, in the black community, the big mamas, grandma, great grandma, auntie, they were able to interpret the dreams. This is a skill that's been passed on through generation and generations since Egypt. So yeah, I tend to believe him on that everybody has dreams, but it's interpreting the dream that's the key. And with that, let's continue.
Joseph isn't special because he has prophetic dreams. Everybody has them. Cupbearer, baker, pharaoh. Joseph knows how to interpret them. Now, in ancient Egypt, the priests were the interpreters of the dreams. Now, how did you get your dream interpreted? Well, the answer is you went to the temple and you asked the priest. Now, one of the things that sort of bothered me for a long time in the Joseph story is that when Pharaoh calls his magicians to interpret the dream, they say, "We don't know." That doesn't sound right. I mean, usually you get a magician, he's going to give you an interpretation of some sort. You know, why are these guys saying we don't know? Well, let me try to give you my answer to that. In ancient Egypt, when you went to a temple for an interpretation of a dream, they didn't free will. They didn't just say off the top of their heads, "Oh, that means this." No. They looked it up in a book. There were books of dream interpretation in the temples. There is a papyrus in the British Museum, which is a book for interpreting dreams. It's an interesting papyrus. What it's got, in one column it says, if a man sees himself, that's it, if a man sees himself. And then you've got another column going across saying, and it gives the dream. So it'll say, if a man sees himself with a dwarf, and that's a real dream listed in the book. If a man sees himself with a dwarf, then comes the interpretation. Bad. And then detailed interpretation. Half his life is gone. I guess the idea is the dwarf is like half a man, maybe. But this dream book had dream after dream. And you would look up the dream. So, for example, there's a dream. If a man sees his enemies making offerings, bad. People are working against him. So there are lots of lists and lists of dreams. Now, you went to a temple, the priest would take out the book and say, all right, let's look it up. All right, he unrolls his papyrus. This isn't in the dream book of Pharaoh's magicians, you know? He's got a dream. 7 lean ears of corn devouring 7 fat ears. They look it up in the book. Nothing like that, Pharaoh. Right? So I think this is the explanation as to why, just why, the magicians say, no, we can't interpret it. You know, it bothered me because you think magicians would usually make these things up. But I think the Egyptian dream book, the existence of an Egyptian dream book, to a great extent confirms the way dreams are dealt with in the Joseph story. You're special if you can interpret them, not if you have them, and not all dreams can be interpreted. If it's not in the book, you're stuck, right? So Joseph's story has a lot of ring of truth in it. Let me ask you, give you another one. 7 lean years are going to happen, right? Remember the 7 fat years? And then 7 lean? Now 7, first of all, is a magical number in Egyptian. It's a magical number. There are 7 celestial cows. There are 7 sacred oils. 7 is a big number. What about 7 years of famine? Well, is there any evidence in Egypt that there was ever this kind of phenomenon? The answer is yes. In Sihel Island, now Sihel Island is in the southern part of Egypt, right next to Aswan. It's a large island in the middle of the Nile, covered with boulders. And the boulders are great. They're big black boulders, and they're inscribed with hieroglyphs. When anybody wanted to say anything that he had done was great, he would go to Sahel Island, have it chiseled on, and it's there for eternity. So you got all kinds of things. You got military campaigns recorded. We came, we saw, we conquered, and we did this. But you also have official records of kings. Kings had their sculptors come there and carve records of what happened. And on Sahel Island, there is a boulder that tells the story of a 7-year famine. A 7-year famine. Now, what would cause a 7-year famine? I mean, it could be other things. It could be locusts, it could be pests, it could be plague. The Nile didn't rise for 7 years. It didn't rise high enough to give you real crops. Right? So, in Egypt, there is a tradition of a 7-year famine. Also, by the way, and as I say, the Egyptians usually didn't record their defeats, the unhappy times. But this, in a sense, is presented as a good time because the Nile didn't rise. The Pharaoh knew to make offerings to the gods, and then the Nile rose. So it's really the Pharaoh solving it, and divine order is restored. But they usually didn't record bad times. But I'll tell you another strange one that sort of gives a little bit of, sort of very similar to this Joseph story. Near Unis's pyramid is a causeway. Remember, 5th Dynasty, going way back. And there are some scenes on that. There are no hieroglyphs next to the scenes, so we're not sure what's being recorded. But it's a picture of people starving to death. It is a picture of people who look almost skeletal, very thin. There was a famine. These aren't people in captive, doesn't look like captive, but something's going on. So we have a tradition in Egypt of a 7-year famine. That's because the Nile didn't rise. We see people starving. We know that the dream story seems to ring true. The feeling I get is that the Joseph story was written by somebody who knew Egypt. It's not just a kind of fairy tale by somebody making it up. Somebody was in Egypt who knew about it. Now, there are other things, though. Let me give you some other things. Remember when Joseph interprets the dreams for Pharaoh? He's given a ring of gold. That is exactly what the Pharaoh did to his viceroys, he did it to his ambassadors, and he did it to his viziers. The ring was a sign of authority. It was a signet ring. It would have your name on it. And you could seal things. I don't mean documents. That's partly it. You would roll up a papyrus, put a lump of mud on it, put your signet in it, your signet ring in it, and then you'd have, nobody could open it. They couldn't seal it again, put the mud, and they wouldn't have that seal to do it. But you also sealed stores of grain. Grain was stored in large jars, big storage jars. And you would put across the top maybe a piece of linen or something, and right where it meets the end, you put your signet ring in a blob of mud, and nobody could steal the grain. So the idea that Joseph is given a gold ring, you wonder, why is Pharaoh given a gold ring? It's a sign of authority in Egypt. Again, somebody knew what they were talking about. One other thing, actually 2 other things. The phrase Abrik, remember I said nobody really knows what it means? It said wherever Joseph went, they cried out after him, Abrik. What we often try to do in Egyptology, if you get an inscription that doesn't make any sense, that's supposed to be in another language, say it out loud and try to hear it in ancient Egyptian. Abrik, Abrik, Abrik. What does it mean? The best bet is that it's really 3 words. Now, if you remember back when I was talking about the Egyptian concept of the heart, and that you thought with your heart, and they have 2 words for heart. One was hat, which meant the foremost thing in your body, the most important thing in your body, and that's used in medical papyri. When you're doing anatomical stuff, they're talking about the heart. Hat. But the other word for heart is ib, or ab. Right, we're not even sure exactly how it's pronounced. So the first word probably means heart, ab. Now, the next part is arche, Abrick. Abrick. Well, the R often meant to, the preposition. Heart, to, and what's the K? K. That's you. It's a suffix pronoun. It comes at the end of a word, means you. So what it really means is like your heart to you, or vaya con Dios, almost like go with God. May your heart remain with you. It's an Egyptian phrase that's kind of said when you put a traveler on the road. So when we have the Bible saying everybody cried out Abrick after him, that's real Egyptian. That's somebody knew what he was talking about. Now also, the idea that the priests kept their land, remember everybody else's land is being bought, but the priests are allowed to keep their land? Well, in a few lectures down the road, you're going to see there came a time in Egypt when the priests had so much land, more than the Pharaoh, that they took control of Egypt. So the priests certainly accumulated land. Another little datum that suggests that this thing is, there's something going on here. And the last thing that I love, because I'm a mummy person, that's my specialty, mummies. It says in the Bible, when they embalm them, it says they embalmed them for 40 days and they mourned for 70. For an awful long time, people didn't understand certain things about mummification. The mummification process itself, one major part of it, took 40 days. But the whole ritual and ceremony took 70. The Egyptians had to place somebody in the tomb 70 days after death. It had to be done after 70 days. And that's what the Joseph story tells us. So, internally, we get a really nice feeling that there's something true about the Joseph story. It's not archaeological evidence. It's internal evidence. But it seems to work. See you next time.
Okay. I need a minute to process this. So, if I understand him right, what happened, some of the things that happened in Egypt before the Greeks, during the Greek occupation, and after, were written down and placed in the Bible. A Bible which is designed for mass consumption by the children of Israel, who, by the way, lived in Egypt. So, if I move from Chicago to Texas, after 5 or 6 years, am I still Chicagoan or am I Texan? In my mind, I might be loyal to Texas. I should say, in my mind, if I'm loyal to Chicago, that's all fine and well. But the people from Texas are going to consider me a Texan, especially if I'm observing the local customs. So, my question is, what did the Israelites do that set them apart from the Egyptians? Religiously, they had their customs, the Egyptians had their customs, but could it have been something different, something else that they were doing, where people would see them on the streets and be like, oh yeah, they're not Egyptian, they just live here. They're actually Israelites. Muslims moved to America, we still call them Muslims, but now they're American Muslims. They're Chinese Americans. They're Japanese Americans. They're Irish Americans. They're bringing their culture with them to the new land. So as a black person, born and raised, descendant of slaves, Am I African? Or am I American Negro? I am black. Black American. But am I truly African? Can I say that I'm African? I have no knowledge of my tribe, the language that they speak. All I know is that they're from Africa. So who am I? Can any black person actually say who they are? And why does the government insist on portraying us as a culture, as a people, as African Americans? As it's been said before by a lot of different people, including myself, Africa is a continent, not a country. If you say European American, do you realize how big Europe is? That covers a lot of territory. English, Irish, Welsh, just to name a few. So ponder that. Ponder that. Think about it. What would your response be to that question of who are you really? And I'll talk to you in the comments. We'll chat later.